Hi, welcome back and thanks for watching again. My name is Arito. So today we're going to be doing a fun little comparison between the Boss GE-6 and the GE-7. And before we get started, I will say that this video is kind of a pointless, just purely for fun comparison. And so if you're watching this video thinking you want to buy a equalizer pedal, or you're in the market looking for a good equalizer pedal, this video is probably not going to be for you, and it's probably not going to provide any useful information. In my opinion, no question, the GE-7 is definitely the better of these two pedals. One reason being that while they share the same frequency slider knobs, the GE-7 does have the added 6.4K, although that's probably not much of a useful frequency range for a guitarist, but I do find some use for it if you want to sort of add a little sparkle to a muddy humbucker or something like that. But I think the most useful feature that was added to the GE-7 is the levels knob. And so with the levels knob, you have an added 15 dB of just simple gain level boost. And so you can keep all the sliders flat and then just add a little bit of level and then have it as a full frequency boost. Or you could just do very subtle tweaks in the mid-range and maybe cut down the bass a little bit or do something like that. I don't know. And have the levels knob not too high but just very subtle. And then keep this as an always on pedal to fatten up your sound. Kind of like the EP boost, the exotic EP boost is very popular for being an always on pedal to just subtly fatten up your sound. And so you can do something like that too. So there are many uses once you have that added levels knob to the GE-7. And so in my mind, no question, the GE-7 is definitely the better of these two pedals. And the other thing is the GE-6 was only made for 3 years, has been discontinued for what, 40 years now, and so it's going to be hard to find one, and they aren't very cheap. They're not really a collector's item or anything, but if you try to buy a GE-6, I think they go for about 150 to 200 bucks on the used market, and so for that price I don't think they're really worth it. And so with that out of the way, this is just going to be a fun comparison looking at these two equalizer pedals by Boss. And I will go into some schematic analysis and take a look at what the differences are. They definitely do sound a little bit different once you start moving the knobs around. And I will go into the reasons why. So if you're interested in that kind of stuff, please tag along and watch the video. I want to start off first by jumping into the pedal cam and do a quick comparison of these two with the same knob settings. And then I want to go into a schematic comparison and talk a little bit about why they sound a little bit different. And so let's first dive into that quick comparison, and then we'll talk about the schematic and take a look at some of the differences between these two pedals. Okay, so I just want to first start off with the two equalizer pedals flat, and we'll compare their on and off tones. I will do a similar comparison later on in the video using a looper, so we have the exact same sort of playing, and the tones aren't affected by how I hit the strings. But just for a quick comparison right now, let's run through these pedals real quick. I'm not going to turn this on right now. This is for later comparisons when we do some overdrive tones. So I'm on my Strat in the middle pickup. Okay, so they sound pretty much the same. And so what I want to do is I want to push the 800 Hertz slider knob up one line, so 1/3 of the way up. Okay, and so as I've said in many of my equalizer videos in the past, there's so much that could happen because of parts tolerances, and so moving this 1/3 of the way up according to the white lines is definitely not an exact science. So they are going to sound just a little bit different, but that could easily be because of the pot tolerances, not just of the pots or the sliders themselves, but of any other parts within the pedal, like the capacitors and the resistors within that gyrator circuit. But regardless, let's do this quick comparison. Okay, so there is definitely a subtle difference between the two equalizer pedals when they're on. I'm not sure if that's going to come through in the YouTube compression, but let's do one more thing, and that's to add a 1.6K at the same setting, so 1/3 the way up. Okay, so I hope that's close. And let's do this real quick again. Okay, and so the difference I think becomes a little more obvious once you have two knobs pushed up. And so let's go back to take a look at the schematic and see what happened between the G6 and the G7 to cause those differences, because they are the same frequency sliders, and so they should be doing the same thing, but they definitely do sound a little different. And as I've been continuously repeating, parts tolerances and all that definitely could be a factor in how they sound different. But once we look at the schematic, I think we can see why they have a difference in their tonalities. Okay, so let's go and take a look at the schematic. Okay, so that was a quick comparison between the two pedals with similar knob settings. Like I said, it's impossible to get these perfectly the same. Obviously, parts tolerances and all that stuff, but I tried to do the best I could, and hopefully you heard a difference between these two pedals. And so now what I want to do is I want to take a look at the two schematics for these pedals. And so let me bring up the GE-7 schematic first. And so this is a common schematic that's floating around on the web. This is the first iteration of the GE-7. I did a video a little while back comparing the different generations of the made in Japan GE-7 circuits. Anyway, so this schematic is of that very first iteration of the G7, the 901 circuit. So the G7 that I have is one of the earliest ones that I found. It's 1982. I think it's in April 1982, so it's a very early one with that 901 circuit. So it should be exactly as this schematic. And anyway, so let me bring up the GE-6 schematic. This is something that I actually traced from this pedal that I own. There are a lot of similarities between the G6 and the G7, and you can kind of see how Boss evolved the G6 into the G7. But I want to bring up two of the gyrator circuits within these two pedals. One for the 200 Hertz slider knob and one for the 800 Hertz slider knob. And so I've highlighted the differences where they change those values in red. So once they move to the G7, they change the values of these capacitors and resistors very slightly. And what that's going to do, and so here is maximum 0 and minimum values for the 800 Hertz slider knob, first for the G6 and then for the G7. And then here is those two superimposed on top of each other, and you can see that they changed the Q of the gyrator for the G7, and they made it narrower. And so again, let's do the same thing with the 200 hertz knob. And here you go for the G6, and then the G7, and again superimposed. And so not that big of a difference compared to the 800 hertz, but still the 200 hertz slider knob does have a slightly narrower Q in the GE-7. Now what I want to do is show you a frequency response diagram of what we had just done earlier with the actual guitar, and that is to push the 800 hertz knob and the 1.6K knob 1/3 of the way up. And so here is the G6 and the GE-7, again superimposed, and you can see that they're quite dramatically different, especially in the high-end response. Okay, and so now let's go into the 400 hertz and the 800 hertz, and here is the G6 and then the G7, again superimposed. Okay, so I hope that made some sense, just looking at the subtle changes that Boss did when they designed the GE-7, and how that affects the Q, and then how that affects the overall sound of the pedal when you tweak the knobs. The next thing I want to do is jump into a quick comparison between the two equalizer pedals, using loops that I had from my last video. And so they're just going to be quick, short chords or phrases, so you can kind of hear the differences real easily. And then at the very end, I wasn't sure if I was going to do this, but I'll just do it because I'm sure some people are going to ask. We will do my customary noise comparison between these two pedals, and then we'll add one of my modded G7s in there as well, so you can get an idea of how the noise is. But I think it goes without saying the G6 is definitely a noisy pedal, very much like a stock G7. So you can skip that section if you're not really interested. Anyway, so I hope you enjoyed this fun little comparison. Again, please share your thoughts in the comment section below. And as always, thanks for watching.